This is the Adoptive Mom Podcast. Adoption may look different for each family, but we need solidarity from other crazy people who took this leap. And that is what we do here. We encourage, we build up, we share the wins and losses. We lean on each other, and we get through this together. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 3 of the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I am Alex Fitton, and today I get to introduce you guys to 3 new and awesome people. All 3 of them have a story that started out hard and broken, and it ends up restored and beautiful. They are stories of family and adoption, and they don't look like domestic, international, foster care, or any other kind. 2 of them don't even involve a legal adoption, but they all show the incredible power of love for a kid or an adult who needs it. So before we jump in, I want to remind you guys to rate, review, and share this podcast. I'm serious, y'all. I would appreciate it so incredibly much. And it helps the show reach more people who need to hear it. I also want to remind you guys to go to theadoptivemompodcast.com/email and sign up for Team AMP. That's my weekly newsletter. It has all kinds of fun stuff, including, of course, the episode of the week. You'll get it in your inbox every Monday morning when the show launches, and it's going to be awesome. I've been working hard on this. You should be a part of it, for sure. So, to start us off, I want you guys to meet Brandy Shioyama. Her story is probably the most lifetime-worthy one I've ever heard, and if that's not a good tee-up, then I don't know what is. I'll let her get into all the fun details, so let's get to it. All right, guys, I'm here with Brandy Shioyama, and yeah, I just said your name, but I think there are some other details maybe you could fill us in on. Who are you, and what do you do, and all that fun stuff?
Well, my name's Brandy, like you said, and I am married to Christopher, and I have 3 kids. My oldest is 11, and her name is Jordan, and then I have a 9-year-old son, Hayden, and then Chris and I have a 2.5-year-old daughter named Marley. I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker for 15 years. I've done lots of different things in social work. Currently, I work for The Call. So, yeah. That's me in a nutshell.
And so you're on the Adoptive Mom Podcast, and you're involved with an adoption organization, but you are not an adoptive mom. And
correct.
There's a reason for that, and it's a really cool story. And you're obviously on an episode talking about unconventional adoptions. And so we can just, spoiler alert, you were adopted officially at how old?
I was 32 when I was legally adopted.
Yeah. Which is adorable. I just think that's a cool story. So, let's hear the backstory. How did it come to be? What happened that caused you to be adopted as a full-grown, with kids adult?
Yeah. So my story starts probably, in childhood. I grew up in a sort of unstable home environment. My mother, my biological mother is an addict, an alcoholic, made a lot of really poor life choices. And so my childhood was very turbulent. I grew up that way for years. And I was probably about 9 years old whenever I came to know Christ. I was saved. When I was 9, I rode the church bus to, whatever church came through the neighborhood. And I was at a vacation Bible school and gave my life to Christ. And that's really the earliest sort of memories that I have about my mom's lifestyle. And I really, at that point, I think, started to understand that the choices she was making were very unhealthy and very unsafe. And anyway, it was around that time that I started to really seek out other adults in my life to sort of mentor me, and just other adults that I could look to give me advice, or, that I could kind of model myself after. And so that came in the form of teachers or Sunday school teachers, or pretty much anybody who would kind of let me attach to them. I had a lot of teachers who kind of took me under their wing. And I was in the 9th grade when I moved in with a teacher. And I lived with her and her husband for, I guess, about a year and a half. And so that was sort of an informal foster care situation. I wasn't in state custody, but I wasn't living with my biological mom. These other people were taking care of me. And that was really my first sort of, the first time I really got to observe, and I'm going to put this in quotes, but like a normal family, which I know I don't like that word, but I sort of had in my mind kind of worked up, what normal was and what that looked like. And my life was the opposite of that. And so that was really the first time I got to kind of observe like a man and a wife. My biological mom was a lesbian, and there was a lot of people kind of in and out of our life. And I didn't really get to observe like husband and wife and what that looked like, and just like healthy behavior, healthy parenting, healthy, interpersonal behaviors. And so I was about 14 at that time. And so that was a really great and wonderful experience. They were are wonderful people. They're still in my life. But that situation was never meant to be forever. I believe that attachment is sort of a two-way street. And I loved them and they loved me and cared for me, but there was something kind of missing in terms of that mother-daughter, father-daughter sort of attachment. And so that was never really there for us. So I moved on from their home and went to a residential school in Hot Springs called the Arkansas School for Math and Science. And that was really just another sort of avenue for me to kind of not have to go back to my biological mom's house. I was there for a while. It wasn't working out. So I came back home. But over those past few years, I had kind of gotten to know a family in my church who were foster parents. They were foster parents through the state of Arkansas, and had foster children in and out of their home. And they went to my church, and they taught foster parenting classes. They had several kind of toddlers around 2, 3, and 4 in their home. They had adopted a little boy through foster care. And so I kind of had gotten to know them pretty well. I was babysitting for them, and I was just spending a lot of time with them. And we had really built a really good relationship, and I really liked them, and I think they liked me. And so I came back from the high school, and things at home weren't good. I was 16 then, and I ran away from home. I was trying to be emancipated. I was looking for all sorts of ways that I could get out of my mother's home, because it just was not a good situation for me. It wasn't somewhere I wanted to be. It wasn't somewhere I needed to be. Anyway, at that time, this family that I had become involved with had my mother served with guardianship papers. And my mom begrudgingly signed them and let me go and live with them. And so I was 16 at that time, and they were my legal guardians. And I lived with them for the next 2 years as their ward, basically. But they were my parents in every sense of the word. I called them mom and dad very early on. My attachment to them was pretty immediate. And at the time, as a 16-year-old girl, I felt an attachment from them. But in hindsight, I realized that may not have happened as quickly for them as it did for me. But it was just a really good relationship from the very beginning. I was a 16-year-old girl, so I know I wasn't all, rainbows and butterflies. But they loved me anyway. And when I turned 18, we kind of talked about adoption. They had adopted previously through foster care, and they were no longer foster parents at this time. But so we kicked it back and forth. And honestly, my memory isn't super great about that. But I do know we talked about it, and we just determined it was expensive. We didn't really need the title. We were family. And so on my 18th birthday, I went to the courthouse, and I had my last name, legally changed to their last name. And that was really enough for us. And so I was 18 when that happened, and I lived the next however many years. I'm really bad at math. Their daughter, they're my parents, and I was their daughter. We did Sunday lunch every week. When I got married, they gave me away. When I had kids, they were nanny and granddad to my children. I mean, in every way, they were my parents. And I never really questioned the legality. I mean, I knew it wasn't legal, but it never really bothered me that it wasn't legal. Most people in my life assumed that they had legally adopted me due to our relationship. But when I was 32, I had divorced and gone through some things. And my dad's dad died, and his family's not from here. They live in Texarkana, and they don't see me a whole lot, and they don't see me with my parents a whole lot. And so I'm not sure that they really fully understood the depth of my relationship with my parents. And when my dad's dad passed away at the funeral, they were reading the eulogy, and they listed me as a foster grandchild, and did not bother me in the slightest. I didn't take offense to that at all. But a few weeks after the funeral, my dad and my mom pulled me aside on a Sunday before we had Sunday lunch and said that that my dad told me it bothered him. It bothered him that that they referred to me that way, and that he felt like they should adopt me, so that everybody else would be forced to recognize, the relationship that we have. And so I was 32 at the time. I had 2 kids and was divorced, and I was like, sure, that sounds great. And so, when you're an adult and you get adopted, you have to give consent for that. So I had to consent to my adoption, and I did. And it was not a big, we didn't go to court really. We just went to an attorney's office and signed the paperwork, and it was filed, and that was that. And I got a new birth certificate as a 32-year-old with a name on it that, is not really my name. So it's cool. But it for me, I mean, I felt very secure in my relationship with my parents. I mean, very secure. But I did not realize how much more secure I was going to feel having that legal piece of paper. My parents are getting older. My mom just turned 70, I think. I hope that's right. I didn't age her more. And my dad's close to that too. And so I had started to worry. My parents have other children. My dad has 2 kids from a previous marriage, and my parents together have a son that they adopted. And I had begun to worry that as they aged and needed end-of-life care, that I may or may not be able to help in that situation because I wasn't a legal relative. And so having that just really brought me a lot of peace and a lot of comfort, knowing that, I can be involved, in their life all the way to the end. It didn't really change anything for us at all. Like I said, we just went into our attorney's office and signed a piece of paper, and we walked out, and life went on the way it has always been. But now, now legally, I'm their daughter and they're my parents. And so a little bit of a different situation. And when I announced it on Facebook, it was funny because I posted it on Facebook and had all these comments that people were like, what? We thought you were already adopted. And yeah, I mean, I was. It just wasn't legal. And so it was really nice, and brought me a lot more security than I even knew I needed. So yeah, that's kind of my story in a nutshell, if you can call that a nutshell.
Yeah. Oh, I think I've heard like the full long story before, and I think you nutshelled it pretty well. But I did some follow-up stuff. So I want to know, and so many kids in your situation would have completely turned against adults. They would have had such a lack of trust for them, and instead you sought them out. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know. People, I train foster parents, and I meet a lot of different people in my field of social work, and a lot of kids. I've worked with children and families pretty much for the entirety of my career, and I don't really know why God gives some of us higher levels of resilience than others, and why he gives some of us, a wider bandwidth, to handle things than others. I have a feeling it had to do with the fact that I met him when I was 9. And I don't know, something about knowing Jesus when I was 9 years old. I don't know. It just made me very aware of what was happening in my life and how I did not want my life to look that way. Everything around me was very chaotic. I had been woken up in the middle of the night by police officers because my mom had been arrested. She had been to prison a couple of times. When I looked around at my peers, things were not chaotic in their lives. And so I don't know. I think I looked around and went, okay, that's what I want. I want safety. I want stability. I didn't want the crazy. I didn't want the unstableness. And so I don't really know the answer to that other than wanting that stability. And I think I was, we talk, I'm sure about attachment and things like that. I was pretty ambivalently attached. And so I was desperate for some sort of mothering, nurturer in my life because I didn't have that. My mom was not that. She was a lot of things, and she did a lot of things for herself, for the benefit of herself. And so she didn't nurture me or love on me, and I think I was just somebody who needed that. And so I sought that out in women, especially my female teachers, people that I somehow recognize some sort of loving nurturer in them. I would flock to them and say, love me, basically is what was happening. And so, as I got older and I'm more mature and more secure person, that kind of let up some. But it wasn't until I was a grown up and began to teach foster parents and learn more about attachment that I realized, hey, I was probably very awkwardly attached to people. And my mom, especially, I started calling her mom right out the gate, and I would touch all over her and hold her hand. And I just was starving, I think, for that type of love and attention. And I think that is why I sought out those types of adults rather than turn away.
But how cool that she didn't turn away from that she kind of embraced that. Yeah. And loved you through it. I think that's a really neat, testimony to your parents. But so let's talk about some of those reactions. So I want to know, first of all, how did your bio family react when they found out
that I was adopted?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't find out right away. I don't have contact with them on purpose. So it's been close to 9 years now. I cut off contact with my bio mom. Just for my own mental health and the mental health of my children. But she did contact me about a year or so after I was adopted to have me sign some legal paperwork for my biological dad. And I had to inform her then that I was no longer a legal relative of his. And it didn't go over well. It went over about as well as, I expected it to. She's always sort of thought I was a very selfish person for leaving, detaching myself from her. And she always has thought that I consider myself better than her. And I did try for a number of years to maintain contact with her out of, the biblical mandate to honor your father and your mother. And I tried really hard to do that for a number of years. And it just became very apparent that for my own mental health, I wasn't going to be able to keep her in my life while she was as unhealthy as she is. And so, so it didn't go great. And it, that's okay with me. I knew that was the reaction I would get when and if she did find out. And, I was willing to encounter her in that way, to have the legal relationship with my parents. So it's unfortunate, but it was, something I was willing to do.
Yeah. I mean, with good reason, I think. So, and part of the reason that you, at the time you didn't have kids whenever you first sort of placed yourself in this family's viewpoint, I guess. Because I think that you babysat for them, like you definitely attached yourself to their family on purpose, and that was a good thing. And you didn't have kids at the time, and I assume that this decision has had so much of an impact on your kids now. So, how did your kids react when you actually were legally adopted? Did they understand, or?
I don't even know that I had a conversation with them about it, honestly. My parents have always been nan and granddad to them. They were at their births. They come to all their, school functions and sporting events. And, I mean, it does come up occasionally, just, at least kids are inquisitive about different things. And I've said, I was adopted by Nana and Granddad, and, a different woman, carried me in her belly. I've given all those sort of age appropriate explanations. Yeah. I don't think though that they actually, they don't remember my biological mom. I mean, they were around her when they were very, very young, but they don't really remember her. And so they don't really have any other reference other than, Nana and Granddad are my parents. And so, but my brother is adopted also, and he's 22-ish. I can't ever remember, but he's biracial. And so he looks different, than the rest of us. And so, that is it's sometimes easier to use him as an example to help them understand it, because he doesn't look like us. He doesn't have the same color of skin. And so sometimes I can talk about, well, just like Uncle Kyle was adopted, I'm adopted in the same way. And, but there wasn't any grand, like, oh, today mom was adopted. There wasn't any, I don't even know that I had a conversation with them about it, quite honestly. But I mean, they just don't know any different. That's always been their life. So they've always had them in there for their grandparents. So yeah, they don't quite know the gravity. I tell people who are fostering or who are adopting or who are getting involved, with kids from trauma or, less, ideal circumstances, that, you're doing something great for that kid, but you're actually doing something even bigger than that, because what my parents did changed the course of my life, but it also changed the course of my kids' lives. And then hopefully changed the course of their lives. Statistically speaking, I shouldn't have a college degree. I shouldn't own a house. I shouldn't, I should be a drug addict, or, I should be a lot of things statistically speaking. And I should be in poverty and raising my children much the same way that I was raised. And none of those things are true. Although I do like food a lot. That's my addiction, I guess. But nothing illegal. And so, my kids don't know any different. They don't know how I grew up. They don't know what that's like. And I'm so thankful for that. But, as they get older, my 11-year-old is starting to get to a point developmentally where she can I can have some of those conversations with her so that she can kind of understand how mom grew up versus how she's growing up. But I'm just glad. I'm glad that, her biggest concern is I need new shorts, not, I got to pee in a cup for mom to pass a drug screen. So, it's a hard balance of when and how to explain things to them. Because I do want them to value, what my parents did for me and what my parents have done for us and for them. But also I want them to enjoy having, an innocent, normal, childhood where they don't have to worry about stuff, like where they're going to get their next meal, or if mom's going to get arrested, or if they're going to get woke up in the middle of the night by a police officer. So those aren't on their radar, and I don't want that on their radar, of course. And so, I've chosen to kind of not have those conversations with them yet. But as they get older, I feel sure, I'll let them in on a little bit more about that.
I think that would be such a hard balance to, see, hey, this is what your life could have been like, and you should appreciate it. But then they have no context for that. And so walking that balance of wanting them to enjoy not living the life you lived, but also appreciate it, that would be so hard. So
it is hard.
Yeah. So one more reaction. What about your husband? What does he think about your story?
He only knows, what I've told him, which, obviously I've told him everything. But, I mean, he loves my parents. My parents adore him. He's, my parents are who he talked to, when he was going to ask me to marry him. So, again, it's all he knows, too. So it's been my life now for so long. I mean, I was 16, and so I'm 36 now. So they've been my parents for, more than half my life. And so it's really all most people know. And when when people first get to know me and I talk about my parents and things like that, nobody would ever dream, that I grew up the way I grew up. People really are surprised by that information when I share it. And a lot of people are like, how are you so normal? And I don't know that I'm normal, but, I am well adjusted apparently. And I give my parents a lot of credit. My mom likes to tell people that I was half raised when she got me. And, I don't think she likes to take a lot of credit for my successes, and I think that's fine. But I do give my parents a lot of credit because I don't know, and I don't want to know how much harder it would have been for me to accomplish the things I've accomplished, or if I would have given up and gone down the easier road, which was, the life I knew, which was a life of, addiction and things. So I give my parents a lot of credit because they showed me a better way. They showed me what it looked like, and they showed me how to do it, and they supported me while I took the steps, to go to college and to, be a functioning member of society. And that's what parents do. I just didn't know that at the time. So
you're like, who
that's
knew?
what parents. Yeah, who knew? And so I give a lot of credit to my parents. I don't know that they always take all the credit that they should, but they did. They changed the course of my life. Because statistically, I don't know where I would be at 36. I mean, I do have a biological sister, and she's not fared as well as me. She lives a very similar life that my biological mom has lived. And again, that's one of those things I don't necessarily understand, why God gives some of us, a desire to get out of that and a resilience to that, and some of us not so much. So I do believe we all make choices, and I chose to try to do something different. But I had a lot of help with that. I think, I like to tell people that, my brain is different. My brain is different than most people's because I experienced trauma and I grew up in poverty, and both of those things physically change the makeup of a child's brain.
Right.
And so for me, things that come natural to people actually are the opposite for me. I have to work really hard to make myself do things that come naturally to other people. And I just have to be very self-aware, and I have to work really hard at that, because the easy thing is usually the unhealthy thing, because that's what comes naturally to me. And that's just brain chemistry and upbringing, and sounds like a bunch of psychobabble, but it's legit.
No, on this podcast, that sounds absolutely normal, because we talk about that stuff a lot, and that's something that I didn't understand for so long. And I think that you have such a unique understanding of this, and you've talked about how healthy you are now and how that's kind of an anomaly based on statistics. And right. I think that something that amazes me is that for most of these kids, or I mean, you're not a kid anymore, but for most people that have come from situations like yours, we talk about trigger warnings a lot, and that sounds like a super millennial term, but it's true. I mean, a lot of times you're like, don't put them in a situation. I think about that with my teen. I'm like, let's steer clear of any situation that's going to be a trigger for him or going to make him regress from all the progress he's done. And you're like, nah, I'm going to get into adoption work and foster care. So yeah. What happened with that? You're like, let's just have it all firing at me. Let's see how this goes.
Well, first of all, I think it's a cruel thing that our society does when we make 18-year-olds decide what they're going to do for the rest of their lives. But at 18, I thought I'm going to be social. Well, first I was going to be a computer engineer, and that lasted 5 minutes. But then I thought I'm going to be a social worker because that sounds fun. And I do love being a social worker. But, most people get into helping professions because of something in their background. That's just in general. That's a fact. And so I, at 18, being very naive and still very young, thought, well, I can help other people because I, grew up this way, and, I have skills, and I do and did. And I feel like the only real detriment that my background brings to my work is that people want to see more outcomes like mine, and they're sometimes fewer and far between than we'd like. And so sometimes people look at me and they're like, where are all the other yous? Where are all the other success stories, basically? And they're usually asking me when they have a teenager or a young adult, and I have to really remind them that you got to give them more time. I'm 36.
I'm like over here. Yes,
right. Where are they? Well, check back when they're in their 30s. it just takes a long time for those folks to get over some of that trauma and not ever really get over it, but process it and kind of get on the other side of it. And I obviously, my childhood was not as traumatic as some of these kids, more traumatic than some of them in some ways. But, there's no cookie cutter. There's no recipe. There's no you're going to experience this, this, and this. We're all different. God made us all different, and we're all going to experience things differently. But that's probably the only detriment is that I can sometimes be labeled sort of like a poster child. And people kind of are like, well, you did it. Other people can do it. And I just have to remind people that we're all very different, and you need to give a lot of grace and a lot of time. Self-awareness is really important. And I think social work really taught me how to do that. When I was in college majoring in social work, we had to do a lot of exercises and papers and a lot of digging deep into why we want to do this work, and can we do this work without allowing our personal, biases to influence us. And I did a lot of work in my early 20s to kind of get to the root of some of the things, that I was feeling and struggling with. And I still work on those things, but, I'm not perfect, but, that I think that my background is helpful to what I do, because it gives me, a unique appreciation for people like you, people who get involved, in the lives of children, from trauma or from, hard places, because I can say with certainty that it matters. What you're doing matters. And I'm an example of that. And had my parents not been, brave enough or, crazy enough, however you want to look at it, to step into, a 16-year-old girl's life, which, I feel like at the time that sounded like cool, but now I'm like, they were crazy. Who moves a 16-year-old girl into your house? They were crazy. But had they not done that, I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to know. I don't want to kind of go down that path and wonder where I'd be today. Because it would have been incredibly difficult for me to accomplish the things I've accomplished without having their support and, just having a family. It's you can easily take for granted the notoriety that comes from having a family when you have a family. And when you don't have a family, you understand how precious that is and the notoriety. There is a notoriety in society, that comes with having a family, having a mom and having a dad. And so I just urge you that if you have that, not to take that for granted, because it is precious, and not everybody is fortunate enough to have that.
So was I right or was I right? That was a pretty awesome story. And next up, we have Gerardo Yañez, another big part of my real life. Gerardo is my husband's best friend and an awesome helper for our family. Our kids even call him Uncle Gerardo. It's pretty cute. Gerardo was born in Mexico, but he grew up in Texas, and he had a pretty traumatic childhood. I love how his story of redemption points us to our communities and Jesus to fulfill us and make us whole. So I hope that teaser was awesome, because we're about to jump in. All right, Gerardo, how's it going?
Going great, Alex. Thanks for having me on your awesome podcast.
I feel like that was good. We did really well right there. That was good, polite banter. Oh my gosh. So, as I said in my introduction, Gerardo is actually my husband's best friend / boyfriend. They have a pretty strong bromance going, and it drives me nuts, but I still love them both.
Guilty.
One more than others. But Gerardo has a really awesome story, and I'm really excited to share it with you guys. But first, Gerardo, can you just introduce us to yourself and what you do and, all that fun stuff?
Sure. Well, my name is Gerardo Yañez, or as Alex likes to refer to me as my actual name, Gerardo Arturo Yañez. So I am actually a travel agent here in Northwest Arkansas. Since actually lovely Alex and beautiful Brian to Mexico recently. I am from the Dallas area most of my life. Moved to the U.S. when I was 2 years old. So actually born in Mexico. Spent most of my life in that area. Have been up here a couple of years now, and really enjoyed up here.
That's awesome. And so, like you said, you moved here from Mexico when you were little. So, you remember 0% of your time in Mexico, correct?
I remember very few things. Some are kind of vivid memories, but mostly I don't really have a recollection of that at all. I mean, I've been here basically my whole life in the U.S., and that's where most of my memories are.
So I have to ask, just because I know the story and it's funny, but what's your earliest memory of being here in the States and trying to learn English or being told to learn English?
Well, whenever my dad would leave for work in the mornings, he would leave and just tell my sister and I, okay, while I'm gone, you guys need to learn English, which we just looked at each other like we have no idea how we do that. So we would just watch the television set on an English channel and just banter back and forth in gibberish, learning absolutely nothing. So then he would get back from work and be angry that we hadn't made any progress. Also, first day of school, my mom sent us off to our elementary school, Bowie Elementary. She didn't speak any English, though, so she sent us on the bus to search for Bobby Elementary. And so my sister and I arrive at the bus area where we were going to transfer to our second bus that will take us to our school. And we're walking around speaking zero English, asking, pleading, probably crying because we're all alone, looking for this Bobby Elementary school bus. And it was tough, but we got there, and within about a year we spoke pretty good English.
That's awesome. And so tell us about just your actual nuclear family. So I know that there's some steps and halves out there somewhere, but who did you grow up with being your family?
So it was my father and mother, who weren't married until I was actually about 24, but I mean, lived together and were together my whole life. So it was almost like they were married. So it was us two. And then my sister, who's about a year and a half older than me, two grades in school older. And that was it. I do have two half brothers, but didn't meet them till later. Right.
And so and I'm asking this, and I don't want to sound too much like a shrink, but describe your childhood a little bit. And I know that really shaped your adulthood a lot, and it shaped your perception of family a lot.
Yeah. So as a child, I naturally am very shy, very reserved.
Which is hilarious if you know him.
Yeah, if you know me now, you'd think that was a pile of crap. Yeah, that's my nature. I'm still that way a little bit at heart. But when I was little, it was definitely like that. I think a big part of that is because I did come into this country as a non-English speaker. I felt out of place. I didn't know my way that first day when I spoke zero English and had no idea where to go. I always felt almost a little bit lost in this country, being different, being Hispanic in a predominantly white area in East Texas. So it was kind of tough. I have always felt different or lesser than a lot of my life. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the way that I was raised. I mean, we were super poor. We didn't speak English part of that time. I knew that other kids saw me differently, or at least thought that way. So it really played into my self-esteem. I had pretty low self-esteem most of my life, but especially when I was younger, and just kind of really felt like an outsider. So.
And what was your relationship with like with your parents?
It was highs and lows, with my dad especially. Both my sister and I kind of had a lot of lows that we remember. He would be really friendly and polite to everyone, including us. I mean, if you met him in the street, he would say hi. He'd strike up a conversation. He's not shy at all. He would wave to every car that would pass by if he was outside. But he was also a very kind of authoritative disciplinarian growing up. So he was always very harsh with us. A lot of discipline, physical and verbal. So we had kind of a back and forth relationship. There were times when we were pretty close, but for the most part, I remember just kind of having some animosity toward him because of kind of some of the things that he said and did. With my mom, it was a lot better. She was the more loving of the two. She also disciplined us, but not to the same extent. And I think it was a little bit easier for us to kind of take advantage of her, since she wasn't kind of that mean parent that my dad was. So we were a lot closer to my mom growing up. But then as teenagers, I think we started to kind of get that attitude that teenagers do. So we started to kind of, I guess, shun her a little bit and grow apart from her. So never been super crazy close to either one, honestly, which sounds weird, especially seeing the structures of my friends and their families. But I was definitely a lot closer to my mom.
Yeah, and I'm glad you hit on that, because that's why I asked those questions, because I think that definitely shaped, whether you wanted it to or not, that shaped how you saw the family structure and how you saw the roles of those who were pouring into you. So on that note, though, let's fast forward a little bit. So you've graduated high school. What happens next?
Yeah, so I mean, being, I guess, traditionally Mexican parents, depending on where you are raised, I guess, but where they came from, basically you either didn't graduate high school or you did, and that was it. That was kind of the expectation. So neither one of my parents actually graduated high school. My dad left home when he was about 16, started working. My mom when she was a little bit older, but same thing, straight into work. They actually met at work. So that was kind of the expectation they had, is let's get them in school. Let's take care of them until they are quote unquote adults, grown-ups, meaning after high school. So once I graduated, a few months after that, they kind of had a talk with us, my sister and I, that is, about how they were planning on moving back to Mexico, which honestly I thought was definitely, I agreed with that decision. At that point, we'd spent a lot more times with our friends than we did at home. We didn't spend that much time at home to begin with. The more freedom, the older we got, the less time we spent. So I was okay with it. I thought they have their family there. They have their friends there. That's where they belong. And like I said, we just weren't super close. So that really didn't faze me. I was kind of glad for them and happy for them to be going back to where their family and friends are.
So, I mean, that would be, it's hard to hear that as someone who did grow up with a close family, because that kind of situation would have been devastating for someone like me. And I think that for you, it would be devastating with other people that you've surrounded yourself with throughout your life since that time. And you said earlier that you are, naturally more shy, more insecure, whatever you would want to call it. And so it was kind of out of character for you to move from the small town you grew up in to the bigger Dallas. And you kind of, you moved in with a friend, right? But that was kind of a whim.
Sure. Yeah. So at my core, I am, I'm very slow to action. I will not take action unless prompted to do so, for the most part. So my friend, Matt, he had been in Dallas for a few years at that point. If it wasn't really for him keeping up with me, texting me, calling me, and then him coming up with the idea for me to move in with him, I probably would still be in Sulphur Springs, honestly. But he decided he wanted a roommate. I decided I wanted to see if there were other places besides Sulphur Springs, Texas. Turns out there are. And made my way to Dallas, lived there for several years. But yeah, that really, I think, helped a lot. I really wasn't in a good place in Sulphur Springs. My parents were gone. Not that really fazed me a whole lot, honestly, but there really just wasn't a whole lot for me in Sulphur Springs. And I had just kind of been depressed, honestly, and just kind of settled into this rut, this day in, day out of the same old, and definitely needed to change. And it was a great decision to move there.
And obviously, I think that was a big, eventual proponent for what got you here today. But the topic of this episode is on non-traditional adoptions. And the reason I wanted to have you on the show is because you're not close to your family. They're living, they're, healthy, I assume, but you haven't seen your mom in however many years. And I don't think that's necessarily a reflection on you, because you're a very loyal person. And I would even say that you're a very, family mentality type person, but it doesn't look the way that a traditional, nuclear family would look like. So tell us a little bit about why that is.
Yeah, so I think a big reason for that is growing up, like I said, it was a very different dynamic than a lot of my friends. I really got a lot of my, I guess, support. And so at home, my parents, I don't remember a single time telling me that they were really proud of me, which at the time I didn't think about, but looking back, I mean, it hurts a lot to remember that. So a lot of that had to come from other people, from teachers, from coaches, etc. So not having that at home, I really wasn't aware of it, I guess, until I started getting that from other people. So I was really just super blessed to have a lot of really close friends of mine whose families really took me in, especially once my parents ended up moving out of the country. Of course, everyone wants to be around family during the holidays, Christmas time, Thanksgiving, etc. I really didn't have anything like that. So I had a lot of, namely probably 3 or 4 different families who would have me over for Christmas. Hey, Gerardo, you're going to be in town this weekend. You need somewhere to stay. We have an extra room. Hey, why don't you come on over for Thanksgiving? We're having a family get together. You should be there. And I mean, just having them check in on what's going on with me, tell me they're excited about things I'm doing, things like that. I just never heard that growing up. So starting to hear that from these people that weren't technically family, I mean, that really changed how I viewed them. And I think it almost changed a little bit how I view my actual family, because I feel like that's something hugely important, especially from parents, that every child needs to hear growing up. And maybe it happened and I'm just not remembering it, but there's a lot of things that I do remember, and it's not that. Whereas these other friends and their parents, they completely, filled me with positivity, and they were just a joy, and just opened their homes, opened their arms, and I mean, really provided when I needed things. And that was just really an amazing thing to have happen to me, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that having those people that surround you during those and show up during those important times, I know that they think of you as family. And I think, honestly, if we're talking about kids being adopted, and not that you're a kid anymore, but I think that one of the most important things that we're talking about is it shapes the way you see them as family. And I'm thinking about, recently Gerardo became a U.S. citizen, and I'm thinking of 3 or 4 different quote families that showed up that have all been huge parts of your life. And I don't know, I just think that's really cool. What did you think about that? And some of them drove really far just to be there for you that day.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it was amazing to feel that from families that weren't, like I said, biologically my families, but were willing to, I mean, even not just recently, but from high school even. I mean, I had a pretty big falling out with my dad late in senior year, and I ended up moving in with one of my friends, and his family just said, hey, yeah, as long as you need to stay here, we'll be here. They fed me, they gave me a place to stay. And I was there for a couple of months. And like I said, any special occasions that would come up, I would have several families that would just open their homes to me. I had one of my really close friends' families, they drove up from Sulphur Springs, so about 5 hours to see my citizenship ceremony. And that just means a lot, because my dad, he was working, so he wasn't able to get off, but not even my dad could make it. So to have other people, friends, families that I'm really close with be there, I mean, that just shows you kind of, I guess, how they feel about me. And I just really appreciate that sort of level of love and showing that.
Yeah, and I think, just to lighten it up a bit, because this is a kind of a funny story. So, I think that to break it down, you definitely have a lot of trauma stories from your childhood. And I think you're seeing now how much that shaped you and how much you still have to overcome through that. Let's shift gears a little bit to something a little more important, because I know that you were raised, I mean, I say this in air quotes, Catholic, right? Like that's your family's background, but it's not like you grew up really like dedicatedly going to mass, right?
Yes, I mean, growing up, it was we went pretty regularly for a while. I don't remember exactly how old I was, 10 maybe, 11, and then it really just stopped. My mom did a pretty good job of having us study the Bible, but my dad worked during the days. My mom, she suffered a stroke after she had me, so it affected her entire right side. She recovered most of her capacity to use her right hand, her right foot, etc., but she was never able to drive after that. So my dad basically was our only mode of transportation. So he worked during the days, wasn't able to take us to church. We did get rides for a while, but then that just kind of stopped. So then there was several years where I just never went to church, and I just kind of thought, you know what? I don't think religion is for me. Some people are religious. I'm just not, and I just was okay with that.
But now you are a believer, and what role did your assembled family play in that?
So yeah, I mean that was huge. The first time I got back in church was actually I was at a cross country meet, and my friends who I was pretty close with, they just kind of started probing, asking questions, and then they invited me to church. They invited me to the dreaded First Baptist Church, Silver Springs. I had only ever heard terrible things about that church and everyone in it. Hypocrites, stuck up, bad people, you name it. So I was a little leery, but I went there and none of those things I felt at all. So I felt welcomed. People were super kind and open. And that kind of got me back in there. Another big reason was my friend David. David's dad is a pastor. He's been big in a church. He actually has a homeless ministry in Dallas, which is pretty awesome. And he was pretty instrumental in kind of keeping me going to church and not just letting it be a social thing, which it is for a lot of high school kids, I believe. They go because their friends go, which is initially why I went. So he was instrumental in kind of keeping me going. And yeah, I mean, all of my friends, the families that kind of took me in, they're all believers and pretty strong ones. I would say some of the best examples in that I know. And so they were always big encouragers. My friends, so their children, they were always, some of my closest friends and just really great examples. And also just really encouraged me to keep going to church. So, I mean, they were pretty important, I would say. Where my parents told me to go because it was the thing to do. We did a Bible study every night with my mom because it was what we had to do. Church was something we had to do, not something that we wanted to do or any sort of relationship scenario. Jesus was just this guy and God was this thing, and it was the Bible was just something you should have studied. Whereas, my friends kind of opened up this other world and kind of made me see that completely differently. And
I think that, I don't know, I think that that's such a beautiful testimony to what this kind of informal adoption can do. And I know that you don't have just one family that has, taken you in, but you have, like 4 or 5 really solid ones, yep. Right? And so I think that while you wouldn't take all of the credit for that, I want to ask you on if you're an adult or if you're a family, if you're even just someone like you and you see a kid who was where you were, who maybe didn't want to portray it but had a rough home life, maybe was hanging around a lot more than normal parents would allow, or just whatever, what would you encourage those parents to do? Because I think that a lot of people on the other side, they don't want to intrude, they don't want to assume. But what did those families do that made all the difference in your life?
They didn't really probe a whole lot. They didn't ask me, why I wasn't at home as much, or a lot. They didn't do anything except just be super kind to me. They just opened up their home, like I said, anytime, whether it was for an 8-hour video game session with their son or a holiday or anything else. They were just really warm, really inviting, which I think in general, that's just a good thing to be as a person, to be inviting to people, to be warm, because you never know what people are going through, or you never know what's going on with someone. But especially for a younger kid, that was just great to have that, and especially not having that at home. So I just think being open, being inviting, just being kind overall is just huge, because everyone has stuff going on. Not a single person that just has a perfect life, kids, adults. So just showing that kindness to a stranger even, but especially just to people that you know, I think is very important. And they may not vocalize it right away, but I think everyone will appreciate that.
Cool. Well, I think that all of that is great advice, and it's great insight into a big need, because not everyone is available for adoption in a traditional sense, or wants to be adopted, or wants to adopt in a traditional sense. But I think that there are a lot more kids like you than we know about. Then, you know, there are a lot more people that grow up thinking they can do it on their own, or thinking that they have to do it on their own. And there's a motivational speaker, and he was a foster kid, and he grew up and he was eventually adopted, and his name is Josh Shipp. And he talks about it, how it just takes one good adult in every kid's life to make all the difference. And, you know, you had a lot of good adults, which is really cool. But I think that that's an important thing to note, is that you can make a difference in the lives of these kids that maybe you can't formally adopt, but that you can open your home to in different ways. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You've been a big supporter, even though you have almost nothing to do with adoption, aside from, I have to give him a shout out. He did live with us for a while, and he dealt with our 3 kids, and he babysits sometimes.
Yes, you just have so many kids.
We can tell so many more stories, but we'll leave it there. So thanks, guys. Okay, so Gerardo is a mess, but like I said before, he's a pretty big deal around here. And finally, we get to hear from Kanya Carlson. Kanya is a mama of 4, and she's married to her high school sweetheart, Ty, or Tyrell, as I like to call him. Kanya had a rough start in life, but has turned it into an amazing story that she uses to fuel her love on all kinds of kids that don't share a shred of DNA with her. So let's get to her interview. All right. Hello, Kanya Carlson. How's it going?
It's going good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And so I'm excited to have you on this episode. And I bet that you never would have thought that you would be on an adoption podcast, right?
Never could I have ever guessed.
So before we get to why you're on an adoption podcast, go ahead and take a second and introduce us to yourself and your family.
Sure. My name is Kanya Carlson, and I am married to my high school sweetheart, Ty Carlson. We have 4 kiddos. We have Finley, who is 9. We have Asher, who is 6. Ellis, who is 3. And then we just had a baby boy who is 7 months, and his name is Kipton. And we have been married for about, oh gosh, put me on the spot, I think 12 years this past July.
About, just like a ballpark.
I'm like, I think it's 12 years. Yeah, but we've been together for about 17 years.
Oh, goodness.
I know, right?
So first of all, your husband's full name is?
Tyrell.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
That's the only name I ever call him.
I know. Me too sometimes when he's in trouble.
Yeah. So also, you guys are fellow members of the 3 Boys, 1 Girl Club.
Correct. Yes.
There's a surprising amount of those in our circle.
Right? I don't know. Maybe it's in the water.
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely something in the water. Okay. So yeah, tell us about your story. And I think that this starts like from way, way little, right?
Way little. Yeah. So growing up, my parents divorced early on, and I don't ever really remember them being together, honestly. So my mom was a single mom early on. And then my dad actually passed away when I was about 8 or 9. And so I had a relationship with him, and then he passed away. And so then my mom was for sure solo, single mom. And I'll just say this to start with. When I was little, I remember being loved and never wanting for anything. And so all of that was not necessarily traumatic, and I felt loved.
Right.
And then I want to fast forward till I was about 15 to 17 years old. That's when things started to get a little bit rocky, I would say.
Right. And so you were a daddy's girl, right?
Yes.
Like that love came from him.
I actually come from a family I have 2 biological brothers who are older than I am by like 10 to 12 years. And so I came on way late in the game, and my dad adored me because he always wanted a little girl. And so, so mostly it was just me and my mom and my next oldest brother who lived together. And so in that time, a family had moved across the street, and they moved across the street when I was 3, and they had a little girl who was 1 grade younger than me, and we hung out all the time. So much so that when I would go to her grandparents' house to go swimming, her mom would say, "This is my son, this is my daughter, and this is just our other daughter," jokingly, because I was just always with them as a little girl. I would go over and play after school. We would walk home to their house. Back then, lots of kids walked home, and I guess you could say we were all 3 latchkey kids nowadays, which we walked home to an empty house. I hung out there until my mom got home, went home at 5:30, and then did the whole nighttime routine with my mom. So I just want to kind of start at when things took a turn for the worse, I guess, for my life kind of going into an upheaval. I was probably 16 when it started. And I remember my mom coming in my room and saying that she was getting remarried and moving. And I remember thinking, didn't even know she had a serious relationship. And I'll say that because looking back, there were lots of men in and out of her life. Nothing ever real serious. I didn't ever think anything of it. And the funny thing is, like, I didn't know that my life wasn't normal. Until I got older and realized, probably shouldn't have been exposed to that. That's probably not okay. But because I just felt loved, and like she was very loving, and there, I didn't think anything of it because that was my normal. So she was going to be moving about an hour away, and I was going to be entering my senior year. So this happened probably about February to March of my junior year of high school. And when she told me, she gave me the option of living with my brother, his wife, and my niece, who lived about 3 hours away at the time. And they would move into the house that we lived in, if that's what I wanted. Or I could move in with the family across the street, because she'd already talked to them as well. Since I'd known them for now almost, I guess it'd be like 13 years. In all my wisdom, I thought, okay, well, my brother's family, so I don't want to burden this other family. I will say, since I had a not normal upbringing, my brother was handicapped, and so I often had to help him do things around the house. And so I feel like I had to grow up really quick and became a caregiver almost. To him as well. So I say in all my wisdom, like, I rationally remember thinking, well, my brother's family, so I don't want to burden the family across the street with a child that they don't want. Family is probably the most logical choice. I don't know many 16-year-olds who are making those kinds of decisions.
Right.
And so, because it was the end of a school year, the plan, my mom was getting married in April, and my brother wasn't going to move until the summer. So I did, in fact, move in across the street with that family. And just until my brother and sister-in-law and my niece moved into the house across the street from them, the house I was currently living in. So I moved across the street, and a couple of things from about March to May in there was a prom that occurred
prom that occurred.
A prom that happened in April. So when my mom got married in April, I remember the wedding. It was in Eureka Springs, and I took my boyfriend at the time and one of my close friends, and it was, to say the least, super awkward because I think as a teenager, and I knew what was going to happen after she got married, I think I already felt those feelings of being abandoned and unwanted. And I will get emotional, and I'm so sorry.
No.
But I remember feeling like unwanted, and like everybody's happy for my mom and almost treating me like the typical teenage girl, not being happy for your mom, not being part of this. So I just kind of stayed to myself. And I will say this now. My mom also struggles with alcohol. And I remember her drinking a lot that night. And she got married in a hotel in Eureka. And me and my friend and my boyfriend going just downstairs to the lobby. And being just so embarrassed by the things that she was saying that were very inappropriate for a mother to be saying. And so it was just little things like that that really made me feel like I had to be the adult in the situation. And so anyway, so she got married in April. And I just remember feeling like, what is going on? Everybody doesn't see what I see, doesn't see her, how she behaves, and thinks that I'm in the wrong. So I often felt like I had no voice in anything that was going on. So back to that prom. That's also a key moment that I remember thinking, this is not an okay situation. I had gone dress shopping with Kim, who is the mom of the family across the street. Kim and Rick are the family that I lived with. And so she was there to tie. It was a dress that tied all the way up the back. And so she knew how to put it on, how to tie it, the whole shebang. Now, my mom paid for the dress. You know, she drove an hour to come see me get ready. But as a hurt teenager, she went to the house across the street that I used to live in while I got ready with Kim and Rick. When I talk about parents, that's who I am referring to. When I talk about siblings, I have a biological brother, and then I have who I say my unmom, my undad, my unbrother, and my unsister when I'm trying to keep it straight. When I'm not, it's just brother, sister, mom, dad.
Right.
And so I did not make the effort to go across the street to my mom. And I remember Kim saying, like, well, do you want to go over there and do pictures with her? And my thought was, not really. I mean, if she doesn't care to come over here and see me, why should I have to go over there? Now, I'm 16 or 17 at this point. And being a teenager, I mean, I'm being a typical teenager as well as having hurt feelings. So I did go over and I did pictures, but she was not happy that Kim stepped into that motherly role for me at that time. And I remember going to prom, having fun, and afterwards we were all going to go to a friend's house and watch a movie and hang out. And on the way to the friend's house, Kim called me and said, hey, I think you should come home. And I was like, okay. So my date brings me home. She's like, we need to talk about something. And so I'm like, oh, goodness, what's going on? So she sits me down. She said, hey, your mom called after you left, and I wanted to wait till after prom was over, but she says she's coming to get you tomorrow. And I'm like, what? I have like a month of school left in my junior year, and she's coming to get me all because of this? And so I cried my eyes out, I'm sure. I don't remember much after that point. I do remember the next day waiting, and she never showed up, and she wouldn't answer her phone or anything. And I think that's when other people started noticing that maybe I wasn't so off base, thinking that my mom was not all with it and all together and maybe did have a problem. So after that, it was kind of like, okay, is she going to continue to do this? Is this going to be an ongoing thing? I don't even remember how it ended up getting resolved, to be honest. I'll just say, like, my brother moved down. We moved across the street. We did the summer before my senior year. And school started for my senior year. And I didn't really talk to my mom very much, because it was kind of, now the relationship was kind of tattered. And it was also that way. My brother and sister-in-law still talked to her and still tried to keep me in contact with her, but I just didn't have much to say. So I would go see her, but I wouldn't talk very much. And so then I'd come off as a bratty teenager, and it was just not good. Mm-hmm. Parents, if you're listening to this, show up for your kids. Because no matter what you've done to them or the situations you found yourself in, they still want you a part of their life, even when it's not a good situation. And I think that's what's also hard that I wanted to make sure I said was, when people are adopting children, I think it's hard because they're never going to replace their parents if they knew their parents in any capacity.
Right.
And because I was way older, I still wanted my mom to want me, to want to be there. So when it came time for the custody, I was terrified. I was going to have to sit in a courtroom with her and tell the judge I wanted to live with my brother and sister-in-law and them to be my guardian. I didn't want to hurt her. So I show up, and she does not show up at all.
Oh, girl.
So later I learned she thought she was doing me a favor because she knew I didn't want to live with her, and that her showing up wasn't going to matter. But I'm telling you, like, it matters. It just matters. Even still, there are days in my marriage or when I'm struggling with my kids that I still don't have that motherly relationship like most people do. Like, I know for a fact, like, you and your mom are really close. And so if you're struggling with your kids, you could probably call your mom and be like, why are they so bad? And she'll be able to tell you, you know what, you're going to survive this. I don't have that. I don't have that mom that I can call every day or have that mother-daughter relationship with. All of that to say, there are people in my life that I see making poor choices, and I just want to be like, your kid still wants you. Your kid still wants you to be there for them. No matter how selfish the decisions you're making, when you get it together, they will be there. And they will still love you, and they forgive so easily. But you have to let go of those selfish desires and those selfish ambitions before you can mend any fences with your children. So she didn't show up. And so then my brother and sister-in-law became my guardians until I turned 18. The end of the year came, and my sister-in-law was kind of done, to be perfectly honest, I think, raising a teenager. Now that I was going to be graduating, we were moving on to what are you going to do after high school. Now, I had gone to visit Kim and Rick without them knowing one time about 4 months before this, just because I wanted to see what they were up to. Wanted to reconnect. They've been a part of my life for 14, 15 years at this time. And when I visited them, they were living in a 2-bedroom house. And so it had who I call my sister and them. So when it came time to graduate, I was like, well, maybe I can go see Kim and Rick. But their daughter's going to be entering her senior year. If I move in, she's going to share a room with me. Like, what am I thinking? I can't ask that of them. But one weekend, I had a note that said, hey, my sister-in-law left the note that said, we're going to visit my grandparents. We'll be back on Sunday. So clearly I wasn't invited. So I thought, well, maybe I can plan to go see Kim and Rick and they would never know because they're going to be gone. So I did. And when I went to visit, they had moved, and they actually moved into a 3-bedroom place. And so immediately I thought, okay, well, they have the extra bedroom, so at least I'm not infringing too much on them. But still, how am I going to ask them this when I haven't talked to them for like a year and a half? Like, what? How is this going to go down? So I went and visited, terrified again of what was going to happen. So I shared everything that had been going on, from walking on eggshells and why I hadn't contacted them, all this stuff. And before I had even finished my story about what I was going to do, they said, well, do you want to move in here? And I think I just started bawling because I felt like it was such an answered prayer.
Wow.
Because I didn't want to ask. And I didn't have to. And for the first time, in a really long time, somebody wanted me.
Oh, man.
And I guarantee you that when this 6-year-old girl came to play at their house with their daughter, they did not think 11 years later they would be taking her in as their own. And so to feel wanted by someone who doesn't have to want you is huge. Which is why now my husband and I have such a heart for kids in general, because we know not everyone's coming over to play with my kids is coming from a home with 2 parents or a Christian family, or that bad words are not okay. I mean, that's some struggles we have with some of the friends that come over. We have to set the rules, and they are okay with it always. All the kids that come over, they're okay with these rules because I think it gives them a glimpse of normalcy, of a life that maybe they don't have. And that's what Kim and Rick provided all those years growing up, was what a 2-parent home looked like. I mean, they literally were like this perfect little family. They had a boy and a girl. I mean, lived on a neighborhood street. Like, it's kind of funny now. But that's what I was privy to across the street, So from the time I graduated until I got married, they cared for me. They provided for me. My kids call them grandma and grandpa. Cousins, I think for a long time, some cousins didn't even know I'm not really related, to be perfectly honest. The grandparents all consider me a granddaughter. It's really kind of crazy how far of an extent this family has really taken me in as their own. But like I said, they were introducing me as their other daughter for so long that I really feel like, okay, so let me back up. Oftentimes growing up, I would feel like God forgot me because my dad passed away, and had he not, this wouldn't be where I was. So why did that happen? And then he gave me a mom who couldn't fill in the gap for both parents. And so I'm like, why? And all the time now, looking back, I know he placed a family across the street because the family I grew up with wasn't the family I would forever have. And so I feel like anytime kids come over, I always say the more the merry. Whether it is caring for them in the capacity of a date night for parents that are friends of mine, whether it's a mom who works and her childcare has fallen through, I tell several of my friends, listen, I used to work and I know how terrible it is to have a sick caregiver and not have backup. So if you need me, you call me. And I love kids when they come in my house as they're my own, because I don't know who's going to need me in 11 years, because that's where my heart is. It's open to the fact that I may have to be that for someone else, and I'm okay with that. And I feel like that is kind of what God has groomed me to do.
Yeah.
Is to care for other kids, because I don't know what the future holds, but I have no doubt there will be a kid that needs to feel wanted, even for a minute.
And you do that in such an amazing capacity. You're the children's ministry director at a church, and you guys also serve as occasional respite parents for foster parents. And I think you guys are doing it,
Right. And I think that's important to know, is like, there's no facility telling me to care for a kid, or there's, it's just in those instances when there are kids who need to be held and loved on and cared for and need to see loving parents. We had a kid over just the other day who lives in our neighborhood, and he said, your house is way calmer than my house. I wish it was like this at my house. And I just honestly wanted to cry, because the irony of the whole situation is I live in the house that Kim and Rick own, the house that I always came over to, the house that I lived in with my sister for a little bit. And now kids are coming into this home and witnessing a family be semi-normal. I don't know that we're normal, but we're gonna roll with it. But it was just so sweet of a reminder that these are the same walls that provided normal for me, that are letting him see two parents with children, maybe not yelling, maybe not swearing, and talking to each other with respect.
Thank you for listening to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I know this stuff is hard, and I hope you found encouragement here. Remember, you are enough, and you're doing a great job. God wants to be at the center of this journey, and He is big enough to redeem all of our mistakes. Don't forget to check out show notes and other resources at theadoptivemompodcast.com. Thanks again for listening.